Welcome to Coding Fundamentals from the Ground Up. Today we are going to learn about Boolean logic and if statements in JavaScript. To start, we will discuss Booleans. A Boolean is a data type that can have two possible values, true or false. In the previous episode, we saw integer variables. Variables can hold Booleans as well. Here I have two Boolean variables, a and b, with a being set to true and b being set to false. Usually Booleans have the naming convention of starting with is, such as is complete. So if you have a task that is tracked by is complete and it had not finished yet, you would expect it to be false. And when it gets completed, the variable would be set to true. I'm just using a and b here for simplicity's sake. They're not really standing for anything in particular. They're just variables for the example here. So one thing that you can do with Booleans is Boolean Algebra. Two of the common operators for Boolean Algebra is and or. So I'm going to put two slashes here, and I don't think I've covered this before, but two slashes is the start of a single line comment. And everything after this will just be ignored by the computer itself. So anything you put in here, you can just leave as a comment, and it'll be useful for you later or just other programmers that are looking at your programs. So I'm just going to put a couple notes here just to make it easier. So for and, the symbol is two ampersands, otherwise known as the and symbol. And or is going to be two pipes, just this vertical line. What and does is it'll take two Booleans, and if they're both true, or they don't necessarily have to, just two statements, and if they're both true, it'll return true. Or on the other hand, if either side is true, it will return true. So we can take these, and we'll start with console.log, and if we do a and b, you would expect this to return false because A is true, but B is false, and is only ever going to evaluate to true if both sides are true. So this came back as false. Now, if we change this to or, you would expect this to be true because A is true, and then it doesn't even matter at this point what B would be because only one of these would need to be true for this whole statement to be evaluated as true. So we're going to go ahead and run this, and this also returned true. Another thing that you can have is not, and not is denoted by just the exclamation point. And what this does is it just basically means whatever that value is, it's just the opposite. So if the value would be true, then it would be false. So if we go back to and, so we're going to put and then we're going to say not B. So A and not B. So A is true, so this is going to be true. And then B is false, but not B should be true. So both of these would be true, and this should evaluate to true. And it did evaluate to true. Now, one of the practical applications of these Boolean statements is if statements. What an if statement is it basically takes a statement and it evaluates it, and if it's true, it'll have a block of code that gets run. But if it evaluates to false, then the block of code is not run. So we're going to type if, and then in parentheses, you put the statement that gets evaluated for truth. So we're going to say if a, console.log, inside the if block. And then we'll just put one here just to show that it's reached the end of the program. So here we have if A, so A is true, we would expect this to be run, and then we would expect to see this at the end as well. So we do see inside the if block, and then we see end of block. Now if we switch this to B, since B is false, we would expect this not to be run, but we would still see the end of block. So we do have the end of block, but this is just never run. Now, in addition to this, we can also have an else statement. So else. And basically, what an else is it's only run if the if blocks above it, none of them evaluate to true. Then it'll fall into else, and that will get run. But if any of the if blocks are evaluated to be true, then you would just never hit the else block. So let's put console.log inside the else block. So we're going to run this. And so B is false. So this didn't get run. But the else, we did hit the else block. And it says inside the else block and then the end of block. So if we change this to A, we would expect this to say inside the if block, but then the else block to be skipped, and then the end of block to be run. And that is exactly what happened. Now, in addition to this, you can also have else if. So we could say else if B, and then let's put console.log inside the else if block. So for this, this will just evaluate to be the same because the A will be true and then all these else block will be ignored. But let's change it and let's say B and then else if A. You would expect if B, so B is false, so this will just be skipped. And then else if A, so A is true, so you would expect inside the else if block. And then you would expect this final else to be skipped because this if evaluated to be true. So let's go ahead and run it. And yes, we see inside the else if block and then the end of block. Now, in addition to these Booleans, you can actually have arithmetic evaluations be put inside these if statements as well. So I'm going to just get rid of this here. And let's say A is 7, and let's say B is 8. So let's say if B is equal to A. Now this is the symbol for is equal to. Remember, 1 equal is the assignment operator. So this will just try to assign A to B, and it's just absolutely not what you want. This is a very common beginner mistake. You'll probably run into it at some point. Just remember that if you want to do equals, you got to have the double equals here. So if we run this, if B equals A, B does not equal A, we would not expect this. So yes, we ran it and we just see end of block. We don't see inside the if block at all because B just doesn't equal A. Now we can do not equals. So remember our exclamation point from before, we just put that in front of the equals. This means not equals. Now, since B does not equal A, we would expect this to show up in our terminal window. So let's go ahead and run. And yes, we see inside the if block because this evaluates to true because B is not equal to A, and then the end of block as well. You can also have less than. So we can say if B is less than A, so B is 8 and A is 7, so this will evaluate to false. And yeah, so this just gets skipped because B is not less than A. Now let's set them both equal to 8. So they are equal now. There is also less than or equal. So B isn't less than A, but B is equal to A. So you would expect inside the if block to get run here. And yes, because B is equal to A, inside the if block actually did get run. So we can just take away this here, just for completeness sake, because if it's strictly less than, it doesn't end up saying inside the if block because it is not actually less than A. So this whole idea of deciding which blocks of codes get executed based on the current state is known as flow control. and it is a very important concept for programming. Most of programming builds off of these topics, so really make sure you try to understand them yourself and understand before moving on. Let me know in the comments if you have any question. Thank you, and have a great week.